The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network begins in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network begins in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network begins in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network begins in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show begins in 5 seconds.
Morning glory, America, bonjour, hi, Canada, greetings to the rest of the world listening on HughHewitt.com, via the web, via any of the conservative talk apps, watching on Univision, watching on Town Hall TV, greetings to you all. I am in Dallas. I've got a cold. I'm allergic to bad football. That's what happens. You come to Dallas and both Aggie football and the Cowboys, they just make me, they put me under the weather. If it wasn't for Zeke that's saving the Cowboys, there'd be no football down here at all. That's for you, Christina. Christina's an Aggie. I was with a bunch of Aggies last night giving a talk, and all we heard about Aggie. No, excuse me, Longhorns. I get them confused. They're the same team, right? So, Christina, are you an Aggie or a Longhorn? I'm not sure. But husband Steve, big win yesterday. I'll tell you about that. Probably got to write a column about that. An executive order he'd been working on for a long time to control the administrative state. President Trump signed it yesterday. That's great news. Here's the deal about today's show. It's a difficult show because people are going to wake up in L.A. and find that they lost to the Nationals. See, Dodgers fans leave in about the fifth inning, so they think they won last night's game. They really do think that baseball's a seven-inning game in L.A., and no one in D.C. is awake because they stayed up all night to see the Nationals' breathtaking comeback, the first time they've ever made it to the National League Championship Series. Town's going to be wild for the next week, absolutely wild. A little bit afraid of the Cardinals. Cardinals bring a lot of baseball history with them, but we'll see. The Nats fans are going to be nuts. They were nuts when the Caps won. If the Nationals get to the World Series, that city's shutting down. Trump won't be impeached. Everyone will come together. If the Nats win, basically it will be a Jubilee year in the Old Testament. Everybody ollie in free for everything. We might throw open the jail doors and let out all the Democrats and Republicans who are in jail, if that happens. Speaking of which, I have a Washington Post column. I want to begin before my voice gives out. This column posted last night late. It's already got 2,200 comments. All right, I want to read it to you. The headline is, House Democrats' Impeachment Inquiry is a Kangaroo Court. On my Wednesday radio show, I begin, I spoke with Beltway reporters and pundits from across the spectrum of outlets and points of view. Jonathan Allen of NBC News, Darren Tumulty of The Post, Chris Liz of CNN, Eliana Johnson of the Washington Free Beacon, Jim Garrity of National Review. To each I posed the key question. Do the House Democrats run the risk of turning their impeachment inquiry into a kangaroo court by so obviously and repeatedly bending or breaking with the precedents of impeachments past? all agreed it is a risk, though each evaluated the risk differently. Americans generally are far from being as attentive to national politics, even impeachment proceedings, than Beltway reporters and pundits. But Beltway reporters and pundits are every bit the same depth of deranged sports fans as the rest of the country, so we analogize that risk using sports. Nothing so upsets a sports fan than a game blown by the officials because of a bad or missed call or a misapplication of a rule. There's no more infamous incident of this than the gold medal game in men's basketball during the 1972 Olympics, during which the referee seemed hell-bent on the Soviets beating the Americans. The list is actually endless, and the worst moments in officiating lists abound. Worse than blown calls are rigged games, which the 72 Olympics may have been, and which the 1919 World Series definitely was. When the fix is in, everyone leaves angry at the refs and the league. Similarly, the fix appears in with the House so-called impeachment inquiry. Hashtags are no longer as powerful as they once were, but President Trump might want to try out hashtag kangaroo court impeachment, because the House inquiry is just that, a kangaroo court. White House counsel Pat Cipollone laid out the argument for concluding as much on Tuesday. Cipollone's entire letter to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and the relevant Democratic committee chairs in the House should be read in its entirety. But three key passages stand out. First, Cipollone argues that, quote, precedent for the right to cross-examine witnesses, call witnesses, and present evidence dates back nearly 150 years. Yet the committees have decided to deny the president these elementary rights and protections that form the basis of the American justice system and are protected by the Constitution. Next, quote, in addition, the House has not provided the committee's ranking members with the authority to issue subpoenas. The right of the minority to issue subpoenas subject to the same rules as the majority has been the standard bipartisan practice in all recent resolutions authorizing presidential impeachment inquiries. Finally, the White House counsel adds, it is transparent that you have resorted to such unprecedented and unconstitutional procedures because you know that a fair process would expose the lack of any basis for your inquiry. These are arguments that Democrats and their media supporters will dispute, but they are anchored in recent past and impeachment proceedings against Bill Clinton and Richard Nixon. The Democrats are abandoning these precedents and the deeply embedded ideals of due process for the accused, and it's a terrible strategic mistake by Pelosi and her party. Cipollone's arguments are powerful because they are indisputably true. Repetition will drive these stakes deep into the American consciousness. And after the failed attempt to get Trump via the Mueller inquiry, and a laugh at people who don't believe the special counsel's probe is understood that way, fair-minded Americans will indeed note and refuse to forget that Democrats cheated when they could not persuade. Secret hearings, witness tampering, refusal of basic and long-standing rights such as the minority party's rights to summon witnesses add up to a rush job, a con job, and a collapse of the Democrats' faith in their own assertions. U.S. Attorney John Durham, Justice Department Inspector General Michael Horowitz's investigations into the origins of the Russian probe may further deepen suspicion of the Democrats' pretend impeachment. Trump could hardly ask for more incompetent impotence than Pelosi, Representative Adam Schiff, and Representative Jerry Nadler. They have time to correct their ill-conceived rush to judgment, but not much. Now, as I told you, 2,262 comments in about, 8 hours. And no doubt it'll get up to 3,000 or so before too
I'm sure
soon.
they all agree.
They agree. Yeah, everyone says, you're right, Hewitt. I didn't know that. They should stop. That's pretty much what they say. Meanwhile, Trump has opened the door to cooperate. I'm looking at the Wall Street Journal. It was brought into me by Tom Tradup this morning. Tom is one of my big bosses. He's in Dallas. That's why I never come to Dallas. I don't like to see the big boss. If I go to New York, I got to see Phil Boyce. If I go to Dallas, I got to see Tom Tradup. If I go to L.A., I got to see Dave Santrella and Ed Atzinger. So I try and stay in D.C. I got a fence around the studio, and it's an electric fence, and we keep people out. But Tradup showed up this morning, gave me a Wall Street Journal, and it's actually more than my producer's done. I don't have a producer. And so it's got bad news at the top. Far-right extremists suspected in Yom Kippur attack in Germany. 2 people are dead, and others were injured. Big deal. Big bad deal. And, of course, the Turkey attack on the Kurds in Syria. We don't know how big it is. There are reports of up to 15 Kurds dead, but it looks to be a border attack on 2 towns. not the genocide that some of the Trump haters were out there saying yesterday. But in any event, the key headline in the middle of the Wall Street Journal above the fold, Trump opens door to cooperate. Biden calls for his impeachment. Well, nobody cares what Biden thinks. Biden's probably getting $100,000 a month from the Ukrainians right now. But President Trump said he would participate in the House impeachment probe if the investigation were authorized by a House vote and if Democrats commit to following rules he views as fair. By the way, those would be the same rules that Bill Clinton and Richard Nixon received. And yesterday they were fact-checking my column at the Washington Post. It took me a while, but I found the House resolutions. Took me a while, but I found Henry Hyde being as fair-minded, as impartial as possible. I found Peter Rodino doing the same thing. Why won't Adam Schiff do that? Because Adam Schiff is scared he doesn't have a case. Not a lick of confidence in their case. My number, 1-800-520-1234. Do you believe that they're going to get right about this? By the way, Donald Trump did say one thing about Lindsey Graham and Syria yesterday, which I do want you to hear. Cut number 11. I love Lindsey. The president, though, doesn't mince words. Cut number 11.
He's already threatened the whistleblower and anyone who talked to the whistleblower.
That's 10. I want 11. 11. Cut number 11. It's called Donald Trump White House Spray. Lindsey Graham would like to stay in Syria for the next... It's not 9, it's number 11.
Lindsey Graham is talking about imposing economic sanctions on Turkey over this incursion into Syria. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's okay. I've already told that to President Erdogan. Far more than sanctions. I'll do far more than sanctions. Lindsey, and I'd feel differently. I think Lindsey would like to stay there for the next 200 years and maybe add a couple of 100,000 people every place. But I disagree with Lindsey on that. But I will tell you that I do agree on sanctions, but I actually think much tougher than sanctions if he doesn't do it in as humane a way as possible. But I've gotten him to stop for virtually from the first day that I was in office. But they've wanted to fight, and that's the way it is, and they've done it for so long. Yes, go ahead.
Lindsey Graham wants to stay for 200 years. And the president is saying, we are going to realign our lines. We're moving backwards. People are worried that it's a massacre and a human rights disaster. A lot of that is just Trump hatred. There is a Turkish incursion. Thus far, it's limited to 2 towns, 14 dead Kurds. We will wait and see whether or not the Trump's policy works. Stay tuned.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Birch Gold Group.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns for break in 4 minutes and 15 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Got a cold, a little voice challenge in Dallas, but I'm with you. Get up, Steve. Come on, get out of bed. I know you're listening on your headphones. I saw Steve last night. He listens every morning. He wakes up at 5 and he puts his headphones on to listen to me. But he lies around in bed, and it's a Cowboys fan for you. He's a cattle rancher, too. I thought they were supposed to be up at 4 in the morning and out there, shodding hoofs and getting the wheat in or something like that. Come on, Steve, get going. Time for the
hoofs?
Whatever they do. I don't know. He's a cattle guy. I don't know. We talked cows last night.
Is that on the brown cows or the black cows?
That's what we were talking about. And he agreed with me that brown cows are more dangerous than black cows when you ride them. He said that. Yesterday, this is brought to you by Birch Gold. Birchgold.com/Hugh. Go get a free info kit on precious metals. Increase your holdings, diversify. The world economy looks really good right now, right? Except for the trade war. What could go wrong? We'll talk with Admiral Stavridis after the break. I just finished Graham Allison's new book, Destined for War, that the Admiral had me read. So much could go wrong. At the end of that book, I said, I'm increasing the Fetching Mrs. Hewitt and I's division into precious metals. Put it in a safety deposit box and just leave it there. You ought to do that, and you ought to do it with Birch Gold. You got a few $100 or a few $1,000, or you want to roll over a part of your IRA or your 401k out of risky stocks and bonds and into a precious metals IRA? To get your no-cost, no-obligation kit, you text Hugh, H-U-G-H, to 474747. Just text my name, Hugh, H-U-G-H, to 474747. Best thing is to go to birchgold.com/Hugh. Birchgold.com/Hugh. Yesterday was a good day on the markets. The Dow was up 181, the NASDAQ up 79, the S&P up 26. But this morning, the S&P is flat, the NASDAQ is flat, the Dow is down 0.05%. Too early in the morning to figure out what's going on. Gold is down a tick to 1511. It's down 0.11%. The 10-year Treasury at 1.59%. It's still a great entry point. Gold only goes crazy when the world goes crazy. Think the world's going to go crazy? Then go to birchgold.com/Hugh. While you're online, please head over to Alliance Defending Freedom, the banner at HughHewitt.com. You've been hearing about this lawsuit that they argued on Tuesday. Neil Gorsuch said this could be a close call. It's not a close call. I think Neil Gorsuch is throwing him a head fake. He's a textualist. It says sex. Sex means biological sex. Doesn't mean gender. Doesn't mean sexual orientation. When there are other words more specific than the word that is used in the statute but omitted, then you do not presume that the general word includes the specific word. That's textualism. Gorsuch will be on the right side of history here, which is if Congress wants to amend the Civil Rights Act of 1964, they need to amend it, not the United States Supreme Court. A great faith in Justice Gorsuch, Justice Kavanaugh, the Chief Justice, Justice Alito, Justice Thomas, and I actually believe they're going to get Kagan and Breyer. Because Kagan and Breyer know if you rewrite the statute, you can rewrite any statute. If you can go back to 1964 and say sex meant gender and sexual orientation and transgendered people are protected by this law, there is no limit on what courts can do. None. So I think it'll be 7-2. Justice Ginsburg and Justice Sotomayor, they don't care about that. I care about that. Let me go back to my cut sheet if I can for a moment. I want to play for you the president with a line that Kurt Schlichter came up with, and no one knows where this came from. Cut number 14, Donald Trump.
Hundreds of billions of dollars. So, no, I don't look at it that way. Now, the Kurds are fighting for their land, just so you understand. They're fighting for their land. And as somebody wrote in a very, very powerful article today, they didn't help us in the Second World War. They didn't help us with Normandy, as an example. They mentioned names of different battles. They were there, but they're there to help us with their land, and that's a different thing. In addition to that, we have spent tremendous amounts of money on helping the Kurds in terms of ammunition.
What the president was doing was quoting Kurt Schlichter. And what Kurt said is, we love the Kurds. We have helped the Kurds. The Kurds have never been an expeditionary force on our behalf, and we have been an expeditionary force on their behalf for 20 to 30 years. So he's arguing that the equities don't compel us to do this. He's arguing that we want to protect the Kurds. We like the Kurds. We don't like the Turks. But he's just saying, don't get carried away here, friend. They're not part of NATO. Turkey is. Stay tuned. It's the Hugh Hewitt Show.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 5 minutes and 15 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. President was in the White House yesterday, took a hit at the NBA. It was a tough hit. And, the NBA is full of limousine liberals. They're very woke. Remember, they banned North Carolina because of the bathroom bill. And yet they're cowering in front of the possibility that President Xi Jinping will shut down the NBA in China. The money is what the NBA is all about. Let's just be honest. They're just capitalists. They just care about their own bottom line. You haven't seen LeBron James wearing a hoodie here. You haven't seen any of them. Very disappointing. The Philadelphia 76ers in the home of liberty ejected 2 fans for carrying support Hong Kong posters. Absolutely unobjectionable. Adam Silver gave a half-hearted statement, trying to have it both ways. Popovich, who everyone says is this great intellectual, he's not. He's a basketball coach. He served in the military honorably. I know that. Pop is not a scholar. He's just a TDS suffering basketball coach, hates Trump. He embarrassed himself. And Donald Trump took aim at Steve Kerr, coach of the what's that team up north that choked to the Cavs in the greatest comeback in NBA history. What's their name? Golden State Kitties. That's it. Steve Kerr is their coach. Donald Trump took out after him yesterday, cut number 12.
Well, the NBA is a different thing. I mean, I watch this guy, Steve Kerr, and he was like a little boy. He was so scared to be even answering the question. He couldn't answer the question. He was shaking. I don't know. He didn't know how to answer the question. And yet he'll talk about the United States very badly. I watched Popovich, sort of the same thing, but he didn't look quite as scared, actually. But they talk badly about the United States, but when it talks about China, they don't want to say anything bad. I thought it was pretty sad, actually. So are you okay it'll be very interesting. Excuse me?
Are you okay then with the Chinese government pressuring the NBA over Hong Kong?
They have to work out their own situation. The NBA they know what they're doing, but I watched the way that, like, Kerr, Popovich, and some of the others were pandering to China, and yet to our own country, it's like they don't respect it. It's like they don't respect it. I said, what a difference. Isn't it sad? It's very sad. To me, it's very sad.
Popovich is a hypocrite. Kerr is a hypocrite. They attacked Donald Trump, who is, very aggressive, very controversial. I'll give you that. A lot of people, I've got my complaints about Trump. You've heard me knock him, 30% of the time. I support him 70% of the time. I'm a sometimes Trumper. But Popovich and Kerr, they're deranged. They hate Trump. They froth. They have spittle. They're flecked space. They're just, and then they rant, and they don't know anything about it, right? If they ever did a serious interview, if Popovich came on this program, he would be exposed as a dummy. I mean, he knows basketball, but I doubt he reads anything other than Google News or something. So Popovich gets asked, and he talked for 2 minutes about what Adam Silver said and how great Adam Silver was, never confronted the issue of Hong Kong demonstrators. He doesn't know anything. I bet you doesn't know when the handover occurred. Honestly. And so I just like to point out they're hypocrites. Kerr, Popovich, the NBA, they're all hypocrites. That's just all you need to know. The president also talked about Joe Biden. I love this. Joe Biden called for the impeachment of the president yesterday. You know what that means? That means his campaign is collapsing in the internal polls. That's what it means. The president talked about Joe Biden, cut number 13.
John?
Mr. President, Joe Biden came out for the first time today and said you should be impeached. Your response?
Well, he's falling like a rock. We have him on tape with corruption. I mean, he's getting the prosecutor for, I guess, John, it was $2 billion, saying we're not going to give you the $2 billion or whatever the amount was unless you get rid of this prosecutor. And then he goes, lo and behold, the prosecutor was gone. And that was the prosecutor. Excuse me, John?
$1.2 billion.
$1.2 billion. Not a lot of money. And then his son takes out $1.5 billion from China. And by the way, the $50,000 a month that he was getting from Ukraine looks like it's $168,000 split among him and somebody else, his friend. And also there's a payment of about $3 million to his son. His son just got thrown out of the Navy. So Biden is dropping like a rock. I don't think he's going to make it. I didn't think he was going to make it for a long time. I don't think he's going to make it. And I guess this is one way he can do it. He didn't say that until right now, and he sees what's happening to him. I guess he's no longer the front runner. But, look, I feel badly for him because I know he's going through a lot. He's been hit, and he's been caught red-handed. I mean, here's a man who is on tape saying exactly what he's going to do in terms of corruption, and he gets away with it. If that ever happened to a Republican, they'd be getting the electric chair right now. They'd be right now being walked into the electric chair. It's a whole different standard. What Joe Biden said on tape, this isn't like, gee whiz, we think. What he said on tape, and the fake media doesn't want to play the tape. They hardly play it. So I feel, that it's too bad what's happened to him. He's sinking and his campaign's sinking. But he walked away with hundreds of, you look at the kind of numbers. His son, who is at best incompetent, got thrown out of the Navy. I don't even want to say why. A subject that we just discussed. I don't want to say why. But he gets thrown, and all of a sudden he's making a deal with Ukraine where they're getting $168,000 a month between the two of them. $168,000, and he gets $3 million payments, and all of this money coming out, and the kid has no expertise in energy, and it's an energy company. He has no expertise. You and I both know much more than he does, John. And then you walk into China, and a couple of days later, 10 days later to be exact, he gets $1.5 billion out of China, and he's got no expertise. And I have friends that are the smartest people on Wall Street. I said, is that possible? They say, no, it's not possible. It's a pretty sad situation.
What he's talking about in the latter case, as far as I can understand it, I don't know much about it, is the allegation, and I believe it's only an allegation at this point, that investors in the PRC deposited $1.5 billion with the venture fund from management run by Hunter Biden and his team. And Hunter Biden went on the trip to prospect for that. And the way that venture funds work is they get rich people to give them money on the promise that they can invest it and make more. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And I got nothing against anyone starting an investor fund. All right. Mitt Romney's son, Tag, one of the smartest guys I know, he runs an investor fund. He makes money. If Hunter Biden made money for the Chinese investors, I'd say, oh, that's just, they were smart. The Ukraine bothers me because he's getting paid directly by Ukraine. And people will have to look into it. But the president's right. Biden's done. And looks like Elizabeth Warren's going to be their nominee. It's going to be terrific. Elizabeth Warren. That's like giving us Pennsylvania at the start. There's no more anti-Pennsylvania person in America than Elizabeth Warren. She'll shut down the state. They'll have unemployment at 20% with Elizabeth Warren. They'll have a depression in Pennsylvania with Elizabeth Warren. Now, I want to play for you Mark Short on Fox News with Bret Baier because he uses the term that I use in the Washington Post this morning. I want everyone to use cut number 4.
Well, Brett, I think the American people have a profound sense of fairness, and I think that they know a sham investigation when they see it, and they know a kangaroo court when they see it. And what's happening right now is you have a chairman of the committee who lied to the American people. He said he hadn't talked, his staff hadn't talked to whistleblower when in fact he had. You have a chairman of the committee who actually is reading fake testimony to the American people. You have basically an investigation right now which we're not allowed to see evidence that they're bringing forward. We're not allowed to cross-examine. The administration is not allowed to have counsel present for its witnesses. The American people have a good sense of fairness, and they know that this is not.
It's a kangaroo court. And the reason my column in the Washington Post, not in the paper, they didn't put it in the paper, they put in 4 anti-Trump pieces in the paper, but it's on the landing page, so 300,000 people have read it already. And 2,000 of those 300,000 people are very mad at me, and they write comments. I want to read it to you again. House Democrats' impeachment inquiry is a kangaroo court. It begins with, Admiral Stavridis joins us. Good morning, Admiral. How are you?
Good morning, Hugh. How are we doing?
We're doing great. We can talk for a while. I know you must have. Give me an idea how much time we have, Admiral, so I don't waste it.
I am wide open. So I just finished something else, and now I'm all yours, Hugh.
All right. Terrific, because we're going to do 2 things. We're going to talk about Turkey, Kurdistan, and Syria. Then we're going to switch to China because on your recommendation, I went out and read Graham Allison's Destined for War, and I'm very upset. And I went out and I am reading Waiting by Ha Jin, and I think I know why you had me read that. So when Stavridis tells me to do something, I do what Admiral Stav tells me to do. So I'm ready to talk about those. But let's start, because I have a different point of view on Turkey. I do not believe Turkey is going to go very far into Syria. I believe that they are making a gesture to firm up his domestic advantage. I don't think there's going to be a genocide. I don't think ISIS is going to run rampaging across the Syrian desert and into Mosul again. But you might disagree, and I'd love to hear. I want to hear what you think about this move.
I hope you're right. I desperately hope you're right, Hugh. And I think there's perhaps a 1 in 3 chance that you are right, that Erdogan prudently stops his advance kind of 5 miles into Syria, creates a safe zone, opens negotiations with the United States, which, by the way, were in progress before the now famous Trump-Erdogan phone call. So that could happen. But unfortunately, Hugh, as I look at President Erdogan, who I know pretty well and met with him multiple occasions when he was prime minister of Turkey and I was supreme allied commander, he's a risk taker. He has Ottoman-like visions of Turkey's place in the world. I agree there's a domestic component to this, but I think, Hugh, there's also a sense that this is Turkey's moment to act like a great power. And so you really see a kind of collision between the ancient, if you will, Ottoman Empire invading what was once the Arab Caliphate, Turks invading Arabs, and who's fluttering around on the sidelines that we ought to worry about? It's the Persians, now called the Iranians. So I think it's a very volatile mix. I wish the president had said to President Erdogan, hey, don't do this. Stop. Let's continue to work together. We've got a very good new Secretary of Defense in Secretary Esper. Put him together with General Secretary Hulusi Akar, the Minister of Defense of Turkey, and let them work this out. That was kind of in progress. Then I think this phone call really moved the goalpost for Erdogan in a way that encouraged him to take this leap. So 1 in 3, the Hugh Hewitt prescription occurs. It stops. We get a negotiation. ISIS doesn't come back. But I think there's a 2 in 3 chance it will, Hugh. That ought to worry us.
Now, Admiral, I want to talk to you about what my reporting is, and I've got some pretty decent sources on this, is that Erdogan adamantly told the president he was going to do this, that the American troops were where he was going to go, and the president was not going to get into a shooting war with Turkey. Now, that's a counterfactual to what happened because we withdrew. Great powers, as we learned from the Graham Allison book, sometimes have to take a loss. They have to walk backwards to avoid escalation. Do you believe Erdogan would have moved, or what do you put at the odds of Erdogan moving with American observers in his way?
I think very low. And that's why I think the president would have been better served to say to President Erdogan, that's just not going to work because we have Americans there. Let's let our ministers of defense get together and work out something before you leap across. I don't think Erdogan wants to take the risk of killing American troops. So we will never know the answer to that question because the president withdrew our troops from the path of the Turks. I think it would have been better to look Erdogan in the eye. And Turks, if you meet their gaze directly, they understand you're quite serious. Let me put it another way, Hugh. And you know me, I don't kind of do domestic politics, but here we see agreement between Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell. We see agreement between Lindsey Graham and Bernie Sanders. Think about that for a minute. I think it's a hard case to be made that this is in any way anything other than a very difficult moment for the United States. I'll close with a historical analogy, by the way. Think about the Korean War, Hugh, and if when things got tough and we were taking a lot of casualties, we had said, those Koreans, they weren't with us at Normandy. Let's get out of here. Let's get out of this thing. We're losing troops. Let's just leave. If we had done that, what would the Korean Peninsula look like today? I think there are bigger equities here than just a tactical moment between the United States and Turkey about which we need to be mindful.
And we will continue to check in on this. My counterfactual is that last week we talked about the great global competition of our time, which is on the sea, under the sea, and in space with anti-satellite weapons and with hypersonic missiles. That the future of America does not depend upon the border conflict between Turkey, Syria, and the Kurds. It depends upon huge allocations of assets and defense thinking to another sphere entirely, and that the president is trying to withdraw to defensible lines and doing so step by step. I will be wrong if the Kurds march in and a genocide occurs, or if the ISIS prisoners get loose. I will be wrong. But if they don't, I think Trump will get credit for this. Is that a fair assessment?
I think it is. And again, I'm here doing the odds. I think there's a 1 in 3 chance what you just described is how this plays out. I'm kind of on the darker side of the equation. And by the way, I agree completely. The big game, big casino is what's happening with the U.S. and China. But the deployment we're talking about here in Syria, Hugh, is only 2,000 to 3,000 U.S. troops. When I commanded the NATO mission in Afghanistan, we had 150,000 troops there. At one time in Iraq, we had 200,000 troops there. I think a small investment of 2,000 to 3,000 special forces in Syria to prevent that 2 and 3 dark side of the equation makes some sense and can be done alongside your absolutely correct assessment that the main ball here is preparing for China.
One more volley back and forth, because I'll let you have the last word. I went on an embedded assignment to Camp Bondsteel at the request of Colonel Kurt Schlichter many years ago. Colonel Kurt was the guy who wrote the column in which he pointed out the Kurds are our allies, but they've never been an expeditionary force on behalf of America, and we have often been an expeditionary force on behalf of the Kurds, so it's not really equilibrium. But I went to Camp Bondsteel with him, with his troops, and noted that we're there 20 years after our intervention in Kosovo. 20 years later, we've got, I think it's 10,000 American troops stationed in Kosovo. Some of these engagements inevitably suck up resources that we all need in an era when the Congress won't do its basic job of appropriating money for our troops. If they want to, and this is what I come back to, Congress can mandate a garrisoning of Syria. They can pass the money and mandate that it be spent there. They've never done that, Admiral.
Absolutely correct on all counts. And as you well know, back to the Korean Peninsula, we still have 35,000 troops on the Korean Peninsula. What do we get out of that? I would argue we get the 15th largest economy in the world, an ally, and a vibrant democracy that stands in a region against China, Russia, and North Korea. But is it worth 35,000 troops for 60, 70 years? I kind of think it is.
I agree.
I agree. Back to Camp Bondsteel, we are actually, small point, we're probably down to about 4,000 U.S. troops there. At one time, we had 15,000 when I commanded that mission. It is a NATO mission. And I think that's a less obvious case of a place to just keep U.S. troops. So each of these apples and oranges and hubcaps are kind of different.
Yeah.
On this one, I'd say on Syria, I'd say 2,000 to 3,000 troops feels about right. I would not advocate garrisoning in Syria. I wouldn't advocate long footprint, but I think of those 2,000 or 3,000 troops, Hugh, as leverage to get a lot done in a very turbulent place.
All right, we will check back in on that. Now I want to switch to China. In our last conversation, the Admiral gave me homework. Graham Allison's book, Destined for War, The Thucydides Trap. I am about 95% done with it. I'm about half done with the novel Waiting by Ha Jin, also assigned to me by the Admiral. And the consequence of this is sleepless nights. It really is. There are so many ways for the U.S. and China to end up in a hot war that are gamed out by Graham Allison, that I walked away thinking to myself, the odds there are pretty dark about that kind of a confrontation coming somewhere. Do you agree with that?
Unfortunately, I do. And we should park for a minute on the title of the book. It's Destined for War. There's no question mark at the end of that. It is a disturbing analysis of history, as you know, but for our listeners, Graham looks at 18 cases across 2,000 years of human history, going back to the ancient Greeks, the Athenians, and the Spartans, 18 occasions in which an established power is challenged by a rising power. And in 12 of those occasions, a global war ensues. Last time it happened, 100 years ago, established power, Great Britain, rising power, Kaiser's Germany. So in this 21st century, established power, United States, rising power, Germany, rising power, China. How do we avoid that so-called Thucydides trap? And I would argue we need that mix of economics, politics, culture, military capability for deterrence in case things go bad. We're going to need all those things if we're going to avoid that Thucydides trap. And I'm with you. It's sleepless going forward.
Now, the two examples he gives that give us some hope are the U.S.-USSR competition, and I think even more tellingly, the U.S.-UK competition in the late 19th, early 20th century, where the United Kingdom basically reconciled themselves to not being number one, but to being very intertwined with number two so that number two could come to their aid when World War II broke out and when they withdrew east of Aden. I don't know that we can get there with China because the systems are so different. but there is a very, very good chance that we could figure out a way to co-evolve with China if we're candid. And I look at incidents like the NBA collapse in the front of Chinese pressure this week and say that is not the way to co-evolve in a productive way. That's the way to give Xi Jinping exactly the wrong input.
And you are exactly correct. And another important one to look at are the demonstrations in Hong Kong. Now, I don't think we should be taking on a military campaign to support. I don't think we should be engaged with the CIA or our intelligence, but we ought to give our verbal support to people who are demonstrating, by and large peacefully. There have been some violent moments, but by and large peacefully, to obtain what they were promised when Hong Kong came away from Britain and became part of China. We ought to support that. And by the way, a huge element in all this going forward in the U.S.-China relationship, is going to be Taiwan, which is watching closely what's happening. Taiwan's a pretty big place, millions of people. It's the 25th largest economy in the world, Taiwan. And so we ought to be supportive of the norms that we believe in forthrightly. That doesn't mean we're on a collision course, doesn't mean we're trying to overthrow the Chinese government, nor are they trying to overthrow our government. But we are going to have to be forthright in how we deal. We're going to have a capable military because deterrence matters. And we're going to have to create workable economic incentives and intertwinement, if there's such a word, between the United States and China over time.
And candor and great explicit statements of what we think are red lines. It's not the 9-dash line. It's not this oil platform there or that artificial island here, but a Tiananmen-like event in Hong Kong. I think the Chinese just have to know the reaction in the West it would shut down, right? It would be shut
Correct.
down. The NBA would care at that point if that happened.
Yeah, we would have much bigger problems than the NBA at that point. But I think China needs to be clear. A Tiananmen-like event in Hong Kong would lead to massive sanctions, pushing China in very dramatic ways out of trade agreements. That could spark a Cold War, and we'd have to be very careful it did not throw us into the Thucydides trap.
Now, let me close by telling you that as a response to your homework assignment, I happened to see that a movie, My People, My Country, was playing in Southern California this weekend, and that there were large crowds outside of it, of Chinese Americans and Chinese people. So I went on Tuesday. It's a 3-hour propaganda film put out to honor the 70th anniversary of the People's Republic's founding. And it's 3 hours of propaganda told through 7 stories, beginning with the October 1949 flag raising in Tiananmen Square, the 1964 test of the atom bomb in China, the 1984 women's gold medal in L.A. in volleyball, the reunification with Hong Kong in 97, the landing of the Chinese astronauts in the Gobi Desert, the August 2017 military parade honoring the 90th anniversary of the PLA. It's beautifully done. And there was applause from this theater, which was half full on a Tuesday afternoon after 3 hours. And I thought to myself, the Chinese people are in love with what President Xi Jinping is doing. And I don't think Americans quite understand that because we focus on Hong Kong and not the 1.39 billion people that live outside of Hong Kong.
Exactly right. And one of the reasons I think Waiting is an important novel is because it's about the tension in China between rural and urban, which is an extraordinary divide in the country. And we tend to think of China as a monolithic block. It's very disaggregated, and there are mechanisms there that we need to understand if we're going to construct the kind of strategy to deal with China that you and I just talked about. And as I've mentioned to you before, my son-in-law is Chinese American. He's a physician. He was born here, doesn't speak a word of Mandarin. But as a result, I have some visibility into this Chinese American community. They're unbelievably loyal, patriotic. They think they've gotten the best deal in the world coming here. But they look across that Pacific Ocean the same way I, as a Greek American, look at Greece and its great achievements in antiquity, and I'm proud of those things. I think Chinese Americans look at China and they understand the power in lifting people out of poverty that has occurred there. On the other hand, all of us Americans, Chinese Americans, Greek Americans, Americans from everywhere, we need to be mindful of this competition that's unfolding in front of us in this 21st century.
My very last question. On Thursday, a week from today, the Nixon Foundation and the Wilson Center are doing an all-day seminar led off by Matt Pottinger, the new Deputy National Security Advisor, ending up with 3 former ambassadors to China on the U.S.-PRC relationship. We call it the Nixon Forum. We're going to do it annually. That's what we call Track 2. That's where people come and they talk to each other. Does Track 2 do anything, Admiral? And would you explain it to our audience so they understand why Track 2 matters?
Sure. Track 1 is formal official diplomacy. That's when Secretary of State Mike Pompeo goes to Beijing, meets the Minister of Foreign Affairs of China. That's a summit between President Trump and Kim of North Korea. That's Track 1. Track 2 diplomacy is when non-governmental organizations come together to compare views. A typical example from my zone would be a group of 4 retired Navy admirals meet with 4 retired Chinese admirals. All of them maybe in their early 60s, so mature people, and they have a dialogue about the challenges that go back and forth. Track 2 does matter because then, in the case I'm giving you, those admirals come back and they call up their active duty friends in the Pentagon. They call up the current Secretary of Defense and they say, I had this conversation with these 4 Chinese retired admirals. Here's what they're thinking. Here's how they view the South China Sea. Here's what they think about Taiwan. It's a way to exchange views, maybe build a little confidence in a non-official setting, far, far away from the glare of publicity. So Track 2 matters. I'll give you a last example, university to university. When I was the dean at the Fletcher School at Tufts University, we had a very vibrant relationship with the leading School of International Relations in Moscow. And we exchanged students. We exchanged faculty. We got to know each other. I think there is benefit there. But at the end of the day, the real traction is Track 1 diplomacy. But Track 2 can help.
Next week, hypersonics, cyber, anti-satellite weapons, and the rest. Admiral Stavridis, thank you for joining us, spending extra time with us today. And I'll wait for my next homework assignment until next week because I'm almost done.
Well, it sounds like my homework assignment is to see a 3-hour Chinese movie. So I'm off to do that this weekend. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Admiral. Okay, what do I do, Adam? All right, I'll be right back. Going to the bathroom.
Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Welcome back, America. Morning Glory. It's Hugh Hewitt in Dallas. Thank you for listening. I spoke with Admiral Stavridis last hour, former Allied Supreme Commander in NATO, and part of it was done off air because we were messed up. He was doing Morning Joe in the morning, and so we just talked straight through. I want to go back and play for you part one of what you didn't hear. Do you believe Erdogan would have moved, or what do you put at the odds of Erdogan moving with American observers in his way?
I think very low. And that's why I think the president would have been better served to say to President Erdogan, you know, that's just not going to work because we have Americans there. Let's let our ministers of defense get together and work out something before you leap across. I don't think Erdogan wants to take the risk of killing American troops. So we will never know the answer to that question because the president withdrew our troops from the path of the Turks. I think it would have been better to look Erdogan in the eye. And Turks, if you meet their gaze directly, they understand you're quite serious. Let me put it another way, Hugh. And you know me, I don't kind of do domestic politics, but here we see agreement between Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell. We see agreement between Lindsey Graham and Bernie Sanders. Think about that for a minute. I think it's a hard case to be made that this is in any way anything other than a very difficult moment for the United States. I'll close with a historical analogy, by the way. Think about the Korean War, Hugh, and if when things got tough and we were taking a lot of casualties, we had said, you know, those Koreans, they weren't with us at Normandy. Let's get out of here. Let's get out of this thing. We're losing troops. Let's just leave. If we had done that, what would the Korean Peninsula look like today? I think there are bigger equities here than just a tactical moment between the United States and Turkey about which we need to be mindful.
And we will continue to check in on this. My counterfactual is that last week we talked about the great global competition of our time, which is on the sea, under the sea, and in space with anti-satellite weapons and with hypersonic missiles. That the future of America does not depend upon the border conflict between Turkey, Syria, and the Kurds. It depends upon huge allocations of assets and defense thinking to another sphere entirely, and that the president is trying to withdraw to defensible lines and doing so step by step. I will be wrong if the Kurds march in and a genocide occurs, or if the ISIS prisoners get loose. I will be wrong. But if they don't, I think Trump will get credit for this. Is that a fair assessment?
I think it is. And again, I'm here doing the odds. I think there's a 1 in 3 chance what you just described is how this plays out. I'm kind of on the darker side of the equation. And by the way, I agree completely. The big game, big casino is what's happening with the U.S. and China. But the deployment we're talking about here in Syria, Hugh, is only 2,000 to 3,000 U.S. troops. When I commanded the NATO mission in Afghanistan, we had 150,000 troops there. At one time in Iraq, we had 200,000 troops there. I think a small investment of 2,000 to 3,000 special forces in Syria to prevent that 2 in 3 dark side of the equation makes some sense and can be done alongside your absolutely correct assessment that the main ball here is preparing for China.
Now, let me close by telling you that as a response to the homework assignment, I happened to see that a movie, My People, My Country, was playing in Southern California this weekend, and that there were large crowds outside of it, of Chinese Americans and Chinese people. So I went on Tuesday. It's a 3-hour propaganda film put out to honor the 70th anniversary of the People's Republic's founding. And it's 3 hours of propaganda told through 7 stories, beginning with the October 1949 flag raising in Tiananmen Square, the 1964 test of the atom bomb in China, the 1984 women's gold medal in L.A. in volleyball, the reunification with Hong Kong in 97, the landing of the Chinese astronauts in the Gobi Desert, the August 2017 military parade honoring the 90th anniversary of the PLA. It's beautifully done. And there was applause from this theater, which was half full on a Tuesday afternoon after 3 hours. And I thought to myself, the Chinese people are in love with what President Xi Jinping is doing. And I don't think Americans quite understand that because we focus on Hong Kong and not the 1.39 billion people that live outside of Hong Kong.
Exactly right. And one of the reasons I think Waiting is an important novel is because it's about the tension in China between rural and urban, which is an extraordinary divide in the country. And we tend to think of China as a monolithic block. It's very disaggregated, and there are mechanisms there that we need to understand if we're going to construct the kind of strategy to deal with China that you and I just talked about. And as I've mentioned to you before, my son-in-law is Chinese American. He's a physician. He was born here, doesn't speak a word of Mandarin. But as a result, I have some visibility into this Chinese American community. They're unbelievably loyal, patriotic. They think they've gotten the best deal in the world coming here, but they look across that Pacific Ocean the same way I, as a Greek American, look at Greece and its great achievements in antiquity, and I'm proud of those things. I think Chinese Americans look at China and they understand the power in lifting people out of poverty that has occurred there. On the other hand, all of us Americans, Chinese Americans, Greek Americans, Americans from everywhere, we need to be mindful of this competition that's unfolding in front of us in this 21st century.
My very last question. On Thursday, a week from today, the Nixon Foundation and the Wilson Center are doing an all-day seminar led off by Matt Pottinger, the new Deputy National Security Advisor, ending up with 3 former ambassadors to China on the U.S.-PRC relationship. We call it the Nixon Forum. We're going to do it annually. That's what we call Track 2. That's where people come and they talk to each other. Does Track 2 do anything, Admiral? And would you explain it to our audience so they understand why Track 2 matters?
Sure. Track 1 is formal official diplomacy. That's when Secretary of State Mike Pompeo goes to Beijing, meets the Minister of Foreign Affairs of China. That's a summit between President Trump and Kim of North Korea. That's Track 1. Track 2 diplomacy is when non-governmental organizations come together to compare views. A typical example from my zone would be a group of 4 retired Navy admirals meet with 4 retired Chinese admirals. All of them maybe in their early 60s, so mature people, and they have a dialogue about the challenges that go back and forth. Track 2 does matter because then, in the case I'm giving you, those admirals come back and they call up their active duty friends in the Pentagon. They call up the current Secretary of Defense and they say, I had this conversation with these 4 Chinese retired admirals. Here's what they're thinking. Here's how they view the South China Sea. Here's what they think about Taiwan. It's a way to exchange views, maybe build a little confidence in a non-official setting, far, far away from the glare of publicity. So Track 2 matters. I'll give you a last example, university to university. When I was the dean at the Fletcher School at Tufts University, we had a very vibrant relationship with the leading School of International Relations in Moscow. And we exchanged students. We exchanged faculty. We got to know each other. I think there is benefit there, but at the end of the day, the real traction is Track 1 diplomacy, but Track 2 can help.
Next week, hypersonics, cyber, anti-satellite weapons, and the rest. Admiral Stavridis, thank you for joining us, spending extra time with us today. And I'll wait for my next homework assignment until next week because I'm almost done.
Well, it sounds like my homework assignment is to see a 3-hour Chinese movie. So I'm off to do that this weekend. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Admiral. I love having Admiral Stav, as he's known on. His website is admiralstav.com. admiralstav.com, and I recommend you read everything he writes. He's dead center, professional military, one of the most experienced and affable, but at the same time direct when we disagree as we do about what President Trump did and needed to do in Turkey. We talk about it in the way that grown-ups should, and it's not the way you see online. There's no sanctimonious puffery in the admiral's position that Trump made a mistake, and there's no 100% certainty on my part that he didn't, which is the way grown-ups ought to talk about this stuff. And it happens when you read books and you realize the complicated nature of worldwide military dispositions. I think we would agree on one thing. We didn't have time to talk about it. The United States Congress has very low credibility because they have not passed a defense appropriations bill. They aren't even close to passing a National Defense Authorization Act, which has not ever not been passed. Congress is wholly broken down because of the impeachment fiasco, and I'll tell you more about that after the break here on the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Lethal Agent, a Mitch Rapp novel by Kyle Mills.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns for break in 4 minutes and 15 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns for break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Thanks so much for listening to the Hugh Hewitt Show. My Washington Post column calls the impeachment proceeding a kangaroo court. And I encourage the President of the United States to use hashtag kangaroo court impeachment. Some young friends of mine said that's too long and hashtags aren't a thing anymore. So what? I know what it is. Everyone else knows what it is. And if President Trump uses his 60 million Twitter followers to popularize a hashtag kangaroo court impeachment, it'll matter again. Make hashtags great again, Mr. President, because I think this is the key argument. Are they breaking all the rules? Now, my friend Jonathan Adler says, Hugh, you're not making a legal argument. You're making a political and presidential argument. I am actually making an argument from precedent to the exact processes which were used to impeach Richard Nixon in 1974, though the final votes were never taken, and Bill Clinton in 1998. The House resolutions establishing the rules are referenced. I got asked by the fact checkers at the Washington Post to please prove it, and I did. And they said, okay, fine. They have wholesale thrown them overboard. All right, time for the pre-market report, brought to you by AndrewandTodd.com. AndrewandTodd.com are the best lenders in the world. They're with Sierra Pacific Mortgage, and they will help you get the loan that you need, especially if you need to consolidate debt. You've gotten in too far or under too much debt, or you've got to pay for college and you haven't got the money, but you've owned your home for a while and you've got some equity. Get rid of those credit cards, pay off the car, put some money in the bank, get a financial advisor from Andrew Del Rey and Todd Avakian at AndrewandTodd.com, and consolidate your life. Get organized. And Andrew and Todd will help you do that. Or you may just want to buy an investment house. With interest rates this low, the 10-year Treasury this morning's up a little bit at 1.59%. So don't wait around. I mean, these are still historic low levels. Doesn't matter if you did it last week or 2 weeks ago, if you're going to do it today. But I can't tell you about next week. I can tell you today, you'll probably get a 30-year rate in the threes. Probably. You might get a 15-year rate at 3.5. I don't know. You've got to get your credit score. You've got to get the house. You've got to find out how much equity you have, how much you want out, or what you want to buy. And to do that, you can call 888-888-1172. It will connect you with Sierra Pacific Mortgages, Andrew Del Rey, and Todd Avakian. But andrewandtodd.com is the better way to go. Yesterday, the Dow was up 181 points. NASDAQ up 80. S&P up 26. Everything started out flat this morning, but the pre-market's moving red. S&P's down 5 points, the NASDAQ down 10, the Dow down 47. The headline at CNN Business, what investors should expect from U.S.-China trade talks. Hugh Hewitt's point of view, nothing. We're not going to get there until next year, if we get there at all. But it ought not to scare you out of the market, but it might want to take you into real estate. It might definitely want to take you into gold. And you definitely should have the lowest rate you can possibly have on the interest that you're paying on your home mortgage. And that means andrewandtodd.com. I continue to look for the latest on what's going on in Turkey. All day yesterday, I didn't pay any attention to, other than the broad picture that Turkey was launching some attacks. There's a big room between Turkey moving in on two border towns and genocide. And the Trump haters were predicting genocide and the ISIS breakout and the return of ISIS. And it's because they hate Trump. They can't see clearly what is going on. As I said to Admiral Stavridis, I may be wrong. If it is, it will be tragic. But I may be right, in which case Trump will have made a strategically wise decision. We have to wait and see. We have to wait and see. Apple has pulled Hong Kong cop trapping map after China uproar. Hong Kong HKmap.live allows citizens and protesters in Hong Kong to use the app to track police activity, and the PRC went nuts. Once again, another American company kowtowing to China. This is not, NBA completely collapsed. The NBA is an embarrassment to every American. And every NBA player that's out there that's been politically correct, wearing their hoodies here, right, showing up at every demonstration they want to show up, they all have gone silent because their money's on the line now. No, they're not. Their money's involved. And so they're turning and running. That's the NBA. Stay tuned, America.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you by Alliance Defending Freedom.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 5 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. Over at the National Interest this morning, Jacob Heilbrunn is arguing that Donald Trump is trying to nudge Hillary Clinton into the presidential race. How great is the temptation for Secretary Clinton? Jacob writes, Clinton has never really come to terms with her defeat. The opportunity to become the first female president must be tantalizing, especially when Clinton sees that Warren, a political neophyte next to Clinton, might become the Democratic nominee. Then there is the lure of finally exercising Trump, the man who against all odds was elected president, putting the kibosh not only on her big planned fireworks display on election night at the Hudson River, but also on her political aspirations. Now, at least one poll released on Monday suggests that she and Trump would be in a deadlock, with each garnering 45% of the vote. Goes on to say psychologists might say they're in a codependent relationship. Whatever the case may be, you've got to start thinking about Hillary coming in to save the Democrats from Elizabeth Warren. I talked about this on Sunday on the Reverend Al's Politics Nation show. I did. Here is that conversation in its entirety.
As the impeachment inquiry into President Trump's abuses of power continues, 2020 candidates will have to thread the needle while campaigning with voters. According to a recent USA Today poll, a plurality of Americans now say they approve of impeachment. But is that all voters want to hear about? Back with me, New York Times columnist Michelle Goldberg and conservative radio host Hugh Hewitt. Michelle, obviously this impeachment inquiry has sucked a lot of the air out of the room in terms of media time. How will it affect the primary races for the Democrats? And if there is, in fact, an impeachment, how will it affect, in your opinion, the 2020 race?
Well, I think that the biggest losers of the impeachment inquiry so far in the primary are some of the kind of second-tier candidates who are really struggling to get oxygen and attention. It just makes it that much harder to break through, even though there could be a possible opportunity. I mean, I think it's completely... I don't want Joe Biden to be the nominee, and I've been pretty open about that, but It's like scandalous.
I read your column.
Right, but
I kind of got that impression.
It is scandalous and obscene the way these lies are being deployed against him. Whether they're going to be effective or not, I feel like I can't judge, but that could potentially be a boon to some of the other candidates, even though I don't think any candidate wants to win the primary that way.
How do you feel that this will affect the election? As in putting on your hat, you and I may disagree on politics, but you're one of the smart analysts and observers of politics in this country, no doubt about it. How does this affect, as an outsider looking at the Democratic primaries, who may win that nomination, if at all? And if the president is impeached, how will it affect the 2020 election, general election?
Well, thank you, Al, for the kind words. I think you've got happy birthday cheer overflowing in your cup there. I appreciate that. I want to take the opportunity to agree with Michelle. That's rare. She's right. The people who were low in the polls can't get any oxygen. The person I thought was going to run away with this, Kamala Harris, can't get back on the stage while impeachment is sucking the air out. I'm glad that Senator Sanders is feeling fine, but I think the heart attack is going to take a lot of steam out of his campaign. I had never heard of Hunter Biden getting $50,000 a month until the whistleblower from a Ukrainian oil and gas magnate who is corrupt. I had not heard of that until the whistleblower put his complaint out there, or her, and therefore I think he is bleeding out as well politically. That means Elizabeth Warren, unless something happens, Elizabeth Warren will lose Pennsylvania, she'll lose Michigan, she'll lose Wisconsin. She's made for Donald Trump to beat her. I think the Democrats have to start looking at Secretary Clinton, because Elizabeth Warren is Secretary Clinton without the experience, the humor, the wisdom, the self-awareness. And they're asking for a replay and worse than 2016. I just wonder if Secretary Clinton isn't thinking what Mitt Romney almost did in 2016, which is third time's a charm.
Michelle, you're kind of frowning.
I know of no Democrat who is eager for a rerun of Hillary Clinton's campaign. I think it would get no traction whatsoever. All of the polls right now, with the caveat that polls this far out are not predictive, and Hillary Clinton was certainly running away with it versus Donald Trump this far out. All of the polls show Elizabeth Warren beating Donald Trump in those three states. And as the idea that she is kind of less viable than Hillary Clinton, she, in some ways, in some surface ways, they're similar. But she is a populist. She certainly doesn't have the baggage of having been too friendly to Wall Street, of having been too cozy with plutocrats. And so I think that there are a lot of Democrats who are coming around to the idea that that kind of Joe Biden's electability argument is falling apart a little bit. And her electability argument is getting stronger because she is running against corruption.
Let me ask you this, Hugh. We've never in American history had an impeached president run for re-election. If, in fact, the House impeaches him and we are into the 2020 race, We don't know if the Senate moves forward with a trial, how long that would be. Are you at all concerned that an impeached president running for re-election could be a problem for Mr. Trump?
I am not, Al, for the simple reason Al Gore was in essence Bill Clinton's third term, and he almost won. He botched that race as well as Secretary Clinton botching 2016. But that impeachment of Bill Clinton did not rub off on Al Gore. I do believe the 1998 off-year elections were an impeachment referenda on a bad impeachment, and the Republicans were punished. Newt Gingrich was thrown out of the speakership. And I believe, unlike 1974, when Republicans were drubbed at the polls in the aftermath of the resignation of President Nixon, that this is up in the air. It's a jump ball. And it will remain a jump ball until we see everything, including U.S. Attorney Durham's report, until we understand what Hunter Biden did for whom and for what reason, until we have the binary choice before us of Donald Trump versus a Democrat. That's what we need.
Michelle, maybe I heard it wrong, but did I hear Hewitt say that Al Gore was the winner in 2000?
Right, and I think that
it took 19 years for us to get you to say that
Al Gore
won that election.
Right, Al Gore won that election in the same way that Hillary
That's
Clinton
why you ought
won
to
the
watch
election.
Politics Nation.
Right.
Anything could happen.
In the same way that Hillary Clinton won the election in 2016.
2.8 million votes.
I think that, look, it's all revisionist history. I don't see any evidence that Al Gore was helped by impeachment. In fact, his efforts to distance himself from Bill Clinton, who was both enormously popular and enormously controversial, probably hurt him. And also, let's go back to the aftermath of the Bill Clinton impeachment.
This is why liberals lose television arguments. They don't listen. But I don't see any evidence that Al Gore was helped by impeachment, which was exactly my point. Al Gore botched it by not talking about the impeachment that was so unpopular. That was my point. They just don't listen. Here's the reality. The Democrats go up this hill. It is Pickett's charge. They are walking into a nightmare, particularly since they are so patently unfair. As my Washington Post column argues, it's over on the landing page at Washington Post. It is a complete and utter kangaroo court. That's what it is. Now, the NBA. Now, Greg Popovich, you know, I don't care for the guy, and I don't really care what a basketball coach thinks about politics. I really don't. I care less about what he thinks about politics than he cares about what I think about the zone defense or who should be on his roster. He doesn't know anything about politics, and I don't know anything about coaching. But Greg Popovich has developed this truth teller image. Right now, the NBA is kowtowing to China. Adam Silver came out and said, blah, 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 free speech, blah, 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 blah. And that was it. Completely cowardice statement. Here's Popovich yesterday, cut number 17.
Freedom of speech. I felt great again. He's been a heck of a leader in that respect and very courageous. And when you compare it to what we've had to live through the last 3 years, there's a big difference, big gap there, leadership-wise and courage-wise.
Stop right there. He won't answer the question. That goes on for a minute and a half. He will not answer the question. All right, I want to thank everyone who has already joined our campaign to support Alliance Defending Freedom. It's groundbreaking work to defend religious freedom, fighting for your religious freedom. Donations at HughHewitt.com, please, or on my special toll-free number, 866-700-1060. That's 866-700-1060. These donations are paving the way for ADF to continue the battles ahead in all 50 states. ADF supplies free legal services to businesses and individuals under attack for exercising their religious freedom. Each of those cases costs thousands of dollars to defend. And people just like you are the only way ADF has the resources it needs to fight those battles. Alliance Defending Freedom attorney Matt Sharp is fired up about donations raised so far, both large and small.
Gives me hope that there is a generation that is going to pick this up and keep fighting these battles. I think there are more opportunities than we've had in decades to advance religious liberty and free speech. And their contribution, whether small or large, helps to fund those efforts, helps us to take that extra case that can be the one that goes to the Supreme Court and sets the precedent that impacts every American. So every little bit, large or small, helps towards that larger battle to help secure these fundamental freedoms.
Fundamental freedoms. Matt Sharp is right. And that's why I'm urging you to support the Alliance Defending Freedom. You can make a tax-deductible donation via the ADF banner at the top of my homepage, HughHewitt.com. Impossible to miss. Alliance Defending Freedom. Please click on it to make your gift in any amount online, or you can call one number, toll-free, 866-700-1060. That's 866-700-1060 to help Alliance Defending Freedom keep winning battles for you. And I stress again and again and again, ADF lawyers are everywhere in this country. They take up every cause that has merit. The people they represent don't have money, like Masterpiece Cake Shop. Jack had no money. Like Baronelle Stutzman in Washington, she didn't have any money. Like this funeral home in Michigan. You know how much money it takes to get to the Supreme Court? It takes hundreds of thousands of dollars. We don't want you. Well, look, if you can donate $100,000, great. Sometimes I'll wake up and there'll be a $10,000 check in that account. Sometimes people just say, you know what, Alliance Defending Freedom is really out there on the front line. They do great legal work. They're 9-0, and I think they're going to be 10-0 over 4 years with the Supreme Court. But you have to take that step, whether it's $10 or $10,000 or $100,000, whether it's $50 or $500 or $5,000, whatever you can afford. HughHewitt.com. The banner is at the top. Now, look here. What have I got? ReliefFactor.com. Why? Because Tom Trata brought it to me. Unlike my producer in California, who shall not be named since he's not there today, I'm using the Relief Factor in the Dallas studio. Brought to me by Tom Trata because Relief Factor is everywhere that Salem is. Why? Because it works. There's only one reason that Gallagher uses it, Prager uses it, Medved used it, and now Seb Gorka uses it, Larry Elder uses it, and I use it, and the Fetching Mrs. Hewitt use it. I got asked last night, again, someone said, do you really take that? And, I said, for years I've been taking this. And I said, I ran 10 miles on Saturday. I'm not very fast, but I ran 10 miles on Saturday. My lower back problems are under control. I still do stupid things like fall down sometimes, but ReliefFactor.com can't put in what God left out, to quote Chariots of Fire. ReliefFactor.com. I carry in curcumin, resveratrol, omega. 4 natural supplements. Don't guess at how much you should take. Just take the ReliefFactor.com packet. I'll be right back, America. Stay tuned. It's the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you by Alliance Defending Freedom.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns for break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns for break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns for break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Thank you for listening to today's Hugh Hewitt Show. Democrats are losing their mind over impeachment. I'd love to know what you think. 1-800-520-1234. Is this a kangaroo court? 1-800-520-1234. We heard what Joe Biden said yesterday. Desperate attempt to stay relevant as he bleeds out politically. Cut number 7, Joe Biden.
To preserve our Constitution, our democracy, our basic integrity, he should be impeached. That's not only because of what he's done. To answer whether he has committed acts of sufficient to warrant impeachment is obvious. We see it in Trump's own words. We see it in the text from State Department officials that have been made public. We see it in his pulling much of the United States government into his corrupt schemes, individuals within the government, his appointees. But we have to remember that impeachment isn't only about what the president's done. It's about the threat the president poses to the nation if allowed to remain in office.
So you got Joe Biden calling for impeachment. Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State. By the way, I always tell people, my son works at the Department of State. So Emo over at Media Matters, you can note that I always disclose. I disclose again, my son works at the Department of State. Mike Pompeo was on PBS NewsHour last night with Judy Woodruff talking about the Ukraine call between President Zelensky that is powering the faux impeachment, the kangaroo court. Cut number 20, Secretary of State last night on the PBS NewsHour.
I was on the call. I listened to it. It was consistent with what President Trump has been trying to do to take corruption out. I found that to be wholly appropriate to try and get another country to stop being corrupt. But the most important reaction is from President Zelensky himself, who said, no, I didn't feel pushed. I didn't feel pressured. Everyone keeps suggesting that somehow there was undue pressure. I assure you, countries all around the world every day call me to try and get America to behave in the way that's in the best interest of their country. They try to apply pressure to me, and we work on it. We work on it diplomatically to achieve good outcomes for the American people. And the results that President Trump has achieved with respect to our relationship with Ukraine, I think will stand on their own as a hallmark of success of the State Department and what this administration has done.
Now, Judy Woodruff is not having any of it, and she's defending Joe Biden, and Mike Pompeo comes back, cut number 21.
There's been no proof of any misdoing on the part of Vice President Biden.
You all keep repeating that line as if you're working for the DNC.
I'm definitely not working for the DNC. I'm an independent journalist, but they're the European Union.
I just love that. They all keep repeating that line. There is no evidence that Joe Biden did anything wrong. I'm sorry, he's on tape saying he got the Ukrainian prosecutor fired. Now, you can just apply one standard. It's the one standard rule. Let me go to Delaware and talk to John. Hi, John. You're on the Hugh Hewitt Show, originating from Dallas today.
Good morning, Hugh. How's the weather in Dallas?
It's hot. I told Steve, my new friend, that I can't stay in Dallas. I get sick when I come to Dallas because they have bad football. It makes me ill. My friend Christina, the Aggie Longhorn, I told her that too. But what's on your mind?
Well, I just wanted to know why nobody seems to be playing this footage of Joe Biden extorting the president of the Ukraine. I mean, it's live and direct. It gets no clearer than that, and nobody wants to play the video. I think you guys, Hugh, should play that video as much as you possibly can.
I would need a producer. I would need a producer for that. You know I don't have a producer.
I know, but I wish more people would play it because nobody
I do too.
cares,
But
Hugh.
if Salem is listening, I'll get a producer. I mean, I'm at the mothership, so I would get a producer. I could do that. Steve in Detroit, what do you say, Steve?
Hey, Hugh, how you doing?
I'm good, buddy. How are you?
Good. Lions stink, even though they thought it was a moral victory against the Chiefs. We're not ready for a parade down Woodward Avenue. So
I hope
we got a
not,
long
because
way to
Woodward
go.
Avenue's not ready for a parade.
No, we're not. They got too much construction, too. Anyway, Kangaroo Court. But, Hugh, I want to tell you something. My Democrat representative in Congress had a town hall last week at 4 o'clock on a Friday, and then she only had a venue for 125 people. So these guys don't want to talk to their constituents, and they're playing this game. Really, they're hurting due process for all people. And, they just slaughter people today. So it's a kangaroo court, and what I like, this is just me, a good old boy from Detroit. I just love the president punching back. He's not wavering, Hugh. And if there were some that said if we had other presidents in there, they'd be wilting under the pressure. So I kind of like that.
No, it's going to be a brawl. It's going to be a brawl, and he's going to win. Thank you, my friend. Always good to talk to Steve. Let's go to Columbus, Browns affiliate 89.9. Kevin, how are you, my friend?
Oh, I'm doing okay, but no, I don't think it's a kangaroo court. I think that.
Do you think Baker Mayfield is the best quarterback in the NFL?
No, I don't think that either.
Well, then obviously you're just not the right. I want you to stick through the break, okay, Kevin? We got to work on you. If you don't think this is a kangaroo court and you don't think Baker Mayfield's the best quarterback, we got a lot to do. You got to wait until I'm done with Michael Oren, then I'll come back to you. But you need a lot of help. Therapy is my business right here on the Hugh Hewitt Show. Dr. Michael Oren, though, begins the next hour from Israel, both on the Syria-Turkey invasion and on what's going on in Israel. Don't miss it. It's all right here on the Hugh Hewitt Show.
This portion of the Hugh Hewitt Show has been brought to you by MyPillow. Call 800-951-5493 or go to MyPillow.com and be sure to use a promo code HUGH.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 8 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 7 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 7 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 6 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 6 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 5 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 5 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Morning, glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Greetings. It's Hugh Hewitt. If you're listening in Israel, I got a lot of people who do listen to me in Israel every morning via HughHewitt.com and increasingly in the PRC. Welcome. Always good to have our international audience. And I have a special guest this hour from Israel, Dr. Michael Oren, former Israeli ambassador to the United States, former deputy minister in the Israeli government, now out of the Knesset and watching from the sidelines. He's quoted extensively in a story in the New York Times this morning that has got me confused. But let's begin before we get to the story, Dr. Oren, with your general view of President Trump's decision to remove Americans from the Syrian-Turkish border and the Turkish incursion into Syria, which at this hour appears limited to 2 villages. 15 Kurds are dead. That's not good, but it's not the disaster that some people are predicting. I don't know which way it's going to go, but bring us up to date on what you know.
Well, what I know generally, Hugh, and hey, it's always great to be with you.
Thank you.
Is that apart from the reality, 15 Kurds killed, 2 villages bombed, it's the impression that counts in the Middle East. And the impression is of an American that's in retreat, as opposed to the Russians and the Iranians who are aggressing all the time forward. And impressions are crucial here. And if people in the Middle East internalize that America's allies will be left more vulnerable as a result of this decision, then as a resident of one of those allies, then I am, how should I say, I am disquieted.
Okay, I'm scratching my head about this, and let me just be blunt. There has never been, since Nixon, a more pro-Israeli president than Donald Trump. I mean, Nixon did resupply Israel during the Yom Kippur War, and Prime Minister Netanyahu mentioned that when I was in Jerusalem in January. Sua Sponte just brought it up, how great Nixon had been in 73. This president is as good as Nixon, so an adjustment along the lines in Syria does not seem to me to be a reason to doubt the president with regards to Israel.
I would put a finer point. I think this administration is the most pro-Israel administration we've known since Israel's founding in 1948.
Wow.
So it's not only the president who's pro-Israel, it's his Secretary of State, his National Security Advisor, the Secretary of Defense. Once upon a time, we had a very pro-Israel president named George Bush, but we also had Condoleezza Rice, the Secretary of State, who was very critical of us. We don't have that in this administration. Across the board, pro-Israel. The issue is not being pro or anti-Israel. The question is whether America sees itself as the leader of the free world and a defender of our and America's strategic interests in the Middle East and beyond. It's not such ancient history. When 2013, when President Obama refused to enforce his red line vis-a-vis the use of chemical weapons by the Syrian regime against the Syrian people, the Russians internalized that and they moved into the Ukraine. The Chinese internalized that and moved into the South China Sea. It's a world stage here. It's not confined to the Middle East. Anybody who thinks this is about Syria is deluding himself. It's about the world and the world security, and it's about, ultimately, I believe, America's security as well. Now, for Israel, since we have almost zero margin of error on these issues, we have to take into account, seriously, the possibility that if we get into a major war with Hezbollah, with Hamas, or with Iran, and we're talking about a war that could be big, if not bigger than the Yom Kippur War of 1973, we have to take into account that America will not be with us the way it has been in the past, certainly not during 1973 when Richard Nixon resupplied us with an aerial train that brought tens of thousands of tons of military equipment and enabled us ultimately to win that war. We can't bank on that anymore, period.
You know, Michael, I've got to disagree. I know the Yom Kippur airlift was the biggest in history. I think an airlift to Israel in the next war would dwarf what was done in 1973 by this administration. You mentioned Secretary Pompeo, and I always disclose my son works at State. Robert O'Brien, the new National Security Advisor, was my law partner for a half dozen years, a friend for much longer than that, very dear friend. And, of course, the president, Jared Kushner, everybody in the West Wing, hardcore pro-Israel. If they made the mistake, if Iran made the miscalculation to back a Hezbollah attack or a direct attack on Israel, you'd have the United States 110%. And I don't believe we should extrapolate from his desire to tighten internal lines. And indeed, I think it comes back to the fact that we're not getting appropriations out of Congress. We are not getting a National Defense Authorization Act for the first time in my memory. And we have a glowing global competition with China that requires resources that to reallocate away from that particular thrust, the furthest point of American troops in the Middle East, in Syria, I just don't think it goes to the essential commitments of the United States. Although if you were here talking to me about not hitting Iran after the last two attacks, I might nod with you a little bit that was a miscalculation, but not this one.
Again, I want to pick up where you just left off. The decision to step back and let the Turks invade northern Syria comes at the end of a series of decisions that would tend to reinforce the fears that many Israelis, myself included, fear of America's willingness to stay the course, to quote Ronald Reagan, in the Middle East. And the decision not to retaliate against Iran for striking Saudi Arabia with 17 cruise missiles, extraordinary, hitting one of the great energy sources on the planet. The decision to enter into negotiations with Iranian President Rouhani, apparently with reducing, if not completely eliminating, the sanctions that have been reimposed on Iran. And then, by the way, and apparently also getting turned down by Rouhani, tend to reinforce the image of America that wants to detach from the Middle East and wants to strike a deal with the Iranians, maybe a marginally better deal than President Obama struck, but strike a deal. And Israel has to take all of that into consideration, Hugh. We just have to, because again, our margin for error is so small.
But from my perspective, if the Iranians do anything overt versus Israel, the president will be, it will be unambiguously pro-Israel, the response. And I don't think he is committed to a war with Iran in the event of an attack on Israel, but he certainly is committed to the resupply of Israel. Can I ask you while we have you, Dr. Oren, what is going on with your coalition government? Because this is driving us crazy as well. This is partly Israel's problem that no one can speak for Israel authoritatively, though the prime minister remains the prime minister, because no one knows who's going to be your prime minister.
Again, I have to respond with the three words that no guest on your show and no public figure ever want to say, and the words are, I don't know, because nobody knows. And just today, Avigdor Lieberman put out a plan, and again, we're going to get into going to get too deeply and granularly into Israeli politics when I say this, where he said that Netanyahu would give up his position as leader of a right-wing bloc of parties, which include his Likud party, the ultra-rightist Jewish Power Party, and the ultra-Orthodox Party. That's 55 seats. And negotiate only as the head of Likud if Benny Gantz, the head of Blue and White, would allow Prime Minister Netanyahu to be Prime Minister first in a 2-year rotation deal. Now, is that too granular and confusing?
No, actually, I get it. I think
it's all turned down.
Yeah, but now here's my question, though. Do Israelis believe, as I do, that the confusion in their domestic politics impairs their ability to speak with one message abroad?
No, unquestionably. No, internally we don't feel it as much. I always say that Israel is probably one of the more high-functioning anarchies in the world. The economy's doing well. You know, the traffic lights work. People are going to school. But ultimately, if we're confronted with any type of emergency, and what's transpiring to the north of us, remember, where I'm talking to you right now, I'm in central Tel Aviv, is it all of a 2-hour drive from Syria? These aren't big differences. And we're a 7 or 8 hour drive from Baghdad, right where I'm standing to, right here. You get into a car and go. It's the difference between Los Angeles and San Francisco, or Boston and New York. And so if we're confronted with any type of emergency or crisis, the government will be hard-pressed to grapple with it. And
last question.
I
have been reading in the Times of Israel and the Jerusalem Post and whatever Haaretz takes down their paywall, very, very ominous signs of a looming confrontation with Hezbollah. How realistic is that? Are we over a 50% probability right now of a real hot war in the north?
I always think we're over a 50% chance. And I think that, again, to go back to our original topic about America's position, the indications that America wants to withdraw from this area of the world, wants to pull back from this area of the world, is not going to respond forcibly to Iranian aggression. And Iran, of course, is the big patron of Hezbollah. Hezbollah is basically a branch of the Iranian regime. That message is being internalized, and we have to take it into account. I believe, as you do, that America will always be by our side, but belief is one thing, and planning for the next war another.
Dr. Michael Oren, thank you for joining us on short notice this morning. Follow him on Twitter at Dr. Michael Oren. Dr. Michael Oren. I'll be right back, America. Your phone calls at 1-800-520-1234. Would we stand by Israel in the event of an attack from Hezbollah? I think so. What do you think? 1-800-520-1234. I view what's going on the Turkey-Syria border as wholly different from this, but what do you think?
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns for break in 4 minutes and 15 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt in Dallas today, broadcasting from the SRN mothership, and so happy to be here. Always a wonderful reception in Dallas. Even Tom Tradup talks to me when I come here. It's remarkable. The only time of the year he talks to me. I have a producer when I come here. It's really remarkable as well. But I get sick because I'm allergic to bad football. Now, my friend Christina, who is either an Aggie or a Longhorn, I'm not sure. I don't think it makes much difference. Tells me it's the best football in the world, but it's all just kind of a blur of teams that don't really stand out. And I was at an event last night, and, Aggies, Horned Toads, Longhorn, they're all just one big blob of not very good football. So I'm always happy to be in Dallas. Zeke is saving the Cowboys. Time for the pre-market report brought to you by AndrewandTodd.com. Andrew Del Rey and Todd Avakian. They are Sierra Pacific Mortgage's best lenders. 888-888-1172. They lend you the money. They walk with you every step of the process. They'll find you a realtor. Yesterday, Dwayne always kids me because I always mention Gordon Woods. It's the one I always can remember. He's their preferred realtor in Alexandria, Virginia, where Amazon is coming and people are running around like with their heads cut off trying to buy a house, and they're calling up Gordon saying, help us find a condo or a house quick.
Apparently the only realtor in North America.
Well, the only one I can remember, because Andrew and Todd don't send me the list as often as they should, but I know Gordon. And so no matter where you're buying a house, Grand Rapids or Florida, Portland, Oregon, or San Diego, California, if you need a realtor, AndrewandTodd.com will get you one. And if you're a realtor and you want to work with them, send them a note at AndrewandTodd.com. But more importantly, if you need to refinance your house and get money out to consolidate debt, go to AndrewandTodd.com, answer a couple of questions, and I'll be right back to you with the best option. Or you can call 888-888-1172. And a special message for my seniors out there, 62 years and older. If you're living on too little money, Social Security and savings is not covering it, and you're sitting in a house that you paid off years ago, or it's nearly paid off, do you realize you can get a reverse mortgage? And maybe your kids don't know about this, but there's no reason for you to be eating soup every night if you're sitting on $250,000 of equity. You can go and get that out with a reverse mortgage, get a life estate in your house, never make another mortgage payment. You still have to pay your taxes and your homeowner association, stuff like that. But you can bank that money with a financial advisor in a very safe set of investments. AndrewandTodd.com will help you, and they will walk you through reverse mortgages. A lot of people on the television you just can't trust. You can trust Andrew and Todd. I've known Andrew for 20 plus years. In a men's Bible study with him for many of those years, I've known Todd for 7. They are great guys. They're terrific, moral people of character, as is everyone on their team. AndrewandTodd.com. Fidelity is joining the broker price war. They're ending commission on stock trades. Wow. Dow was up 181 yesterday. The NASDAQ up almost 80. The S&P up 26. But everything is red this morning. The S&P futures, an hour from the start of the market day, down 5 points. Very little on the S&P. NASDAQ is down 12. Very little on the on the NASDAQ. Dow is off 55. Very little as well. Overseas, Japan was up 0.5%. Everything else pretty much the same. The 10-year Treasury, though, at 1.59%. Still great rates. Still great rates. AndrewandTodd.com. Now, can I talk to you about Alliance Defending Freedom? I am a little underwhelmed by your response this year. Last year, we raised, $120,000 in 10 days because they were fighting Masterpiece Cake Shop. And they won Masterpiece Cake Shop. Alliance Defending Freedom won 9 out of their last cases, 9 cases at the Supreme Court. Alliance Defending Freedom is the best public interest law firm. And boy, do they defend the rights of Christians and every other religious people. They defend religious liberty. And I think because you think they won that it's over. It's never over. Ronald Reagan said we are always one generation away from losing our freedom. Not if ADF has anything to say about it. But I need you in the game again this year. Whatever you gave last year, please step up again. The fight goes on. Every single year, the fight goes on. Go to HughHewitt.com. Hit the banner at the top of HughHewitt.com. That's the best thing to do. And don't put it off, please. We've got to show ADF we're with them. They just argued on Tuesday. They're going to win again, but we need your support for Alliance Defending Freedom. I'll be right back, America. My phone number is 1-800-520-1234. Can Israel rely on the United States? 1-800-520-1234. Stay tuned.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you by Alliance Defending Freedom.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 5 minutes and 15 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Welcome back, America. Hugh Hewitt. If you can't have Kreskin, you'd better get Kornacki. Some of you are too young to remember the amazing Kreskin with Johnny Carson, but I can, and Steve Kornacki could do that bit right now. I'm going to ask him to put an envelope up next to his head and tell me what's polling on impeachment going to be like in 3 months, Steve Kornacki.
I remember Kreskin, too. I think one thing is clear on polling right now. The inquiry, there's consistent support for it, separate from the question of impeachment and removal. I wouldn't be surprised if a few months from now it looks about like it does right now. That seems to be the pattern. That seems to be the safe bet in politics these days. Things seem to polarize and just sort of set in place. The numbers have moved a little bit in the last 2 weeks. Democrats have come much more firmly in favor of it. There's been a little bit of cracks among Republicans, independents, but I think the safe bet usually in politics is that things these days is that they'll stay the same.
Okay, I've made one big bet this week, which could be wrong, which is that the Turks will stop and we will not have a humanitarian nightmare in Kurdistan portion of Syria. Here's my second big bet. As Americans become aware of what Cipollone argued in his letter to the White House counsel yesterday, and I argued in a Washington Post column today, the tide is going to turn decisively against this because not the underlying facts, that's a debatable jump ball, but process matters to Americans. And there were rules laid down in 74 and 98, House resolutions governing both the impeachments of Nixon and Clinton, that the Pelosi Schiff impeachment has thrown out the window. It smacks of a rigged game. And I compared it to the 1972 men's Olympics final in basketball, Steve. When the game is rigged, Americans don't like it.
Yeah, well, let's see. I could certainly see the argument you're making working in the court of public opinion on Capitol Hill, in particular, keeping Republicans in line, on Trump's side. In terms of the polling on this, like I was saying a minute ago, even before all of this began, right, for the last 2 years, when you polled the question of impeachment, support for it was generally mid-30s, high 30s. Sometimes it would break over into the low 40s. Now you're seeing it into the mid-40s, really. That's pretty consistently. And what's happened there, a big part of what's happened there is a number of Democrats, I think, were hesitant, and I think they were picking up on the hesitancy of their own party. Nancy Pelosi, until 3 weeks ago, wouldn't talk about this. Most Democratic leaders, until a few weeks ago, wouldn't talk about this. And I think what you had happen is basically the entire Democratic Party in Washington has thrown itself behind this, and Democratic voters around the country are kind of taking their cue from that. And now when you poll it, you're seeing a dramatic jump in the number of Democrats behind this. I suspect that dynamic is here to stay as long as this impeachment drama plays out.
I believe the Democrats won't leave until they see a political cost. And I think the political cost depends entirely on a unified message delivery system from the president down to the local party chairman, which is it's a rigged game. And that's why I'm looking a month out from now. They began to get that message out with the Cipollone letter yesterday, and they have the evidence on their side, the facts on their side, when they used 1974 and 1998's resolutions to show that the Democrats are not allowing the minority counsel to call witnesses, cross-examine witnesses. It's secret hearings. It's all very not American. And I think that's a winning message we will see in 2 weeks. Let me talk to you about the Democratic primary. I'm fascinated. What do you see happening to Joe? I never heard of Hunter Biden, the Ukraine, until this whistleblower stepped up. Never had heard of it. And I think a lot of people's eyes are wide and getting wider about this. It's got to be hurting Joe Biden, isn't it?
Well, so look at it this way. If you take the average of all the national polls, they just kind of keep a Real Clear Politics does a good one of these. A bunch of other sites do as well. Every poll constantly coming out, you throw it into the national average. Joe Biden's been in this race for 6 months now, basically, and he led the national polling average every single day until 2 days ago. And then all of a sudden, Elizabeth Warren passed him for the first. I say passed him. She moved 0.2 of a point ahead of him in the national polling average. And then yesterday afternoon, a new poll came out. He was in second place, but he was a stronger second place, and it actually bumped him back into the lead by a fraction of a point nationally. So that's what you've got going on nationally. Very tight, essentially a tie between Biden and Warren. Certainly, there's two ways of looking at this, I think. Has his support crashed among Democrats or dropped among Democrats since this Ukraine story broke? There's no sign of that. The question I have, though, is this something that will let me put it this way. Let me back up. The aim of his campaign, I think, or the hope of his campaign was that they would rally Democrats to them based on Trump singling Biden out, Biden becoming a main Trump target, and then Biden being able to rally Democrats and say, see, this guy is scared of me. So there hasn't been a rally to Biden effect that you've seen in the polls. There haven't been any defections from him. So it's tough for me to measure. I do think there's a possibility here as this plays out. It's not that Democrats defect from him in droves and turn on him. It's just maybe perhaps one more subtle reason in their minds to look at the other options in front of them.
Do you go to many movies, Kornacki?
I used to.
Okay, well, there's a great preview now about Ferrari versus Ford. And Ferrari always won Le Mans until they didn't. And this is the story about when the upset happened. Joe Biden was always going to be the front runner until he wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
And when that happens, is there, in your experience, and I always tell people that Steve Kornacki is just straight down the middle. It's whatever the data says. What happens when a front runner, I've seen them resurrect before. John McCain in 2008, Elizabeth Warren has resurrected what I called a zombie campaign.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens when a front runner falters? When Muskie cries in New Hampshire? When Gary Hart doesn't have the beef in Iowa? What happens?
It can melt away fast. And that's what I think a lot of people, and certainly one thing I'm looking for with Biden here, if there's a sign that begins to happen. He started out this race, I was saying the national polling average. When he got in, he was at 41% nationally in the average. Now that number's about 26%. It's been stable around 26% really for about a month right now. So he lost a chunk of support over the first few months of his campaign. It seems to have leveled off right now at about 26. But hey, there's a debate coming up next week. We've seen him struggle in debates. We've seen other candidates stand out at debates, sometimes at Biden's expense. And I do think, and it's something I've been looking for, do you look up in Iowa and suddenly he's not just in second place, but he's in third place? He's falling double digits behind. We haven't seen something like that yet. But I think if we do, and we've seen that in the past, if we do, that's when the door opens to another candidate. That's when the door opens to somebody we haven't talked about so far, whether that is a Booker or a Klobuchar or a Buttigieg, somebody like that. If Biden takes another step back, I think that's when the door is open to some real chaos in this race.
Now, you just did not mention Bernie. And I bring this up very, very grateful that the senator appears to be fine and recovering. But a heart attack is a heart attack is a heart attack. And I believe a lot of Bernie supporters are not going to say this out loud, but I think they've already left the room. What do you see in the polling?
Yeah, it's funny. I mentioned the average. Bernie Sanders' average on the day Joe Biden got into this race was 14.6%. That was his average in the polls nationally 6 months ago, and his average in the polls now 14.6%. He has stayed flat the entire time. So it seems that for the first 6 months or so, there's been a pretty a core Bernie base has been established, and that's about the size of it. He has not been able to grow it. It's not the same size nearly as what he was able to put together in 2016 running against Hillary Clinton. And I think, when I say there's you talk about the things that will keep voters from joining a bandwagon they're not already on. I think doubts about health. I think, the oldest candidate in the field, 79 years old, would be the oldest president ever inaugurated, having a heart attack, then talking about, potentially slowing down his campaign, then trying to take that back. I think it does potentially create some barriers. He was already facing some issues just in terms of not being able to build his support, maybe being eclipsed by Elizabeth Warren. I think you add this into the mix. It's like you said. I think everybody with a heart is grateful he's okay. But politically, that's a tough situation.
Let me go back and conclude by talking about Elizabeth Warren and Hillary Clinton. I was on with the Reverend Al and Michelle Goldberg on Sunday. I love doing Al's show because he gives people enough time to talk and make a point, and we get along fine, though we don't agree on anything ever. And I brought up the point that Secretary Clinton, third time, could be a charm. Elizabeth Warren is Secretary Clinton without the grace, good humor, and experience. And Michelle Goldberg just about had a Bernie Sanders-like heart attack. She was so upset with the idea that Hillary Clinton could get in. Is there any polling that shows that's a realistic possibility that she could get in and win?
I have not seen it. I have not seen her polled lately, but I can tell you that unlike some other past nominees, the polling that was conducted in the wake of the 2016 election showed Hillary Clinton's favorable, unfavorable number crashing. And that included a number of Democrats, Democratic-leaning independents. It seemed that as the Democratic nominee in 2016, she benefited from a lot of kind of party loyalty. If you didn't like Donald Trump, rally around Hillary Clinton. The minute it was over and the minute she lost, her numbers, and the number 30 sticks out in my head. I'd have to double check that because I have not seen it in a while, but something like a favorable score of about 30%. Very, very bad numbers, and not even good numbers among Democrats in the wake of 2016. So, I think you can do a lot on whether in her mind she'd like to run again or in her heart she'd like to run again. But I think the numbers that I've seen certainly indicate Democrats have moved on.
And Barry, in the same vein, in that same program, I said, Elizabeth Warren is tailor-made to lose Pennsylvania. I grew up 7 miles from Sharon. I know Western Pennsylvania well. Selena Zito agrees with me. I think Elizabeth Warren is just like forfeiting Pennsylvania. Am I wrong?
Well, I always tell people we live in the era when Donald Trump got elected president, so our assumptions about the rules of politics, I think, are all up for debate. And I think there's a strong case that by the traditional rules, our traditional kind of understanding of politics and how they work kind of in the age we live in, our traditional understanding would be, Elizabeth Warren raises some very clear and obvious electability issues for Democrats. But I do think
in Pennsylvania, I'm talking specifically coal land, right?
Yes, in the position on fracking, and however, as I say, in the era of Trump, there does seem to be a premium on some of the attributes that she brings. She brings this sort of fighting style. Democrats see her as somebody who's she's got a lot of energy. They feel so. It's a question of, does she tap into almost that feeling, that yearning for authenticity? It's so hard to define, but does she somehow tap into that in a way that overrides what you would traditionally say are concerns about policy stands?
Steve Kornacki, always a pleasure. Follow him at Steve Kornacki on Twitter and every day on NBC and MSNBC. Always the guy with the best analysis of the numbers. Thank you, Steve. The number you need to know is $19.95. That's what a starter pack, which I'm holding up. If you're watching on Skype right now, thanks to my wonderful friend Barry here in Dallas, you can see me holding up Tom Trattip's Relief Factor, because Tom Trattip takes it every day too. And I carry Kirkman, Resveratrol, Omega. Basically, Pete and Seth Talbot converted all of Salem, and they did it for the best reason. It works. It really does work. Those 4 natural supplements proved by nature over millennia to support the temporary relief of minor aches and pains. It's not going to heal a broken arm, right? If you do what I did, the Heisman on the street 2 weeks ago in D.C., I still got a little bit of pain, but it's gone away. It's significantly less. You see me move my elbow right now, and my shoulder. I credit ReliefFactor.com that my back has not been bothering me, and I'm up to 10 miles again. Not very fast, but I'm up to 10 miles again. So if you're out of a game that you loved, or you're not exercising the way you should, or you have to start walking for the benefit of your heart, for the benefit of losing a few pounds, whatever, and your knees hurt, or you've just got that awful commute, ReliefFactor.com, $19.95, 3-week starter pack. Maybe today is the day I break through and get you to join the tens of thousands of people who, like me, use it every morning. ReliefFactor.com. Stay tuned.
Portions of The Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Lethal Agent, a Mitch Rapp novel by Kyle Mills.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. Returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from in 5 seconds.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt from Dallas today, and my Aggie Longhorn Toad friend, the Texas football people that are confused about who they root for, they're all telling me that no, it's very easy. The Long Toads are the ones that we root for. I really don't care, but I'll tell you one thing: they got to get their football a little bit straight down here. They're a little bit confused, a lot confused, actually. I want to play for you, little Steph Curry. Now, I've got nothing against Steph Curry. The Cavaliers beat him in the greatest comeback in sports history, and that it embarrassed him, and I knew he was a broken man after that. And then they lost again. But he's a wonderful guy. I like the whole bit with his daughter and his wife. He's a wonderful Christian man. Terrific guy. Good role model. Everything is great about Steph Curry. Steph Curry should not talk about politics. Neither should Greg Popovich. I mean, they're perfectly free to, but they embarrass themselves. Here's Steph Curry talking about the Chinese yesterday.
You want to say publicly on certain issues?
No, I think this one just it's a league-wide situation, and our presence in China, it's just a different conversation, I think, than what we have normally, Coach talking about gun violence or gender equality or things that for us is being spokespeople for people who can't speak for themselves within our communities, that makes a huge impact. This situation is a huge weight and gravity to it, and there's going to be some things that need to be sorted out, but I just don't know enough about Chinese history and that, how that's influenced modern society today, and that interaction to speak on it. So that's just where we're at, and I'm sure this is not going away, so we'll come back to it.
Great, thank you. Well, how disappointing is that? I don't know Chinese history, so I can't say whether it's a good idea to use water cannons on demonstrators. I can be woke on everything else, gender equality, whatever else he talked about, because they can be against the bathroom bill in North Carolina, like they know anything about that, right? Honestly, like any of these guys know anything about what they talk about in the way that I do. That's why I don't, diagram zone defenses for Popovich or tell Steph where to take his jumpers from. I watch and enjoy. But if you're going to play the game of being woke for the purposes of selling sneakers and being loved by your fan base, and then you turn your back, I mean, every single person in the street of Hong Kong is taking a risk of their life. This is not hard. This is not rocket science. This isn't a pick and roll. This is not difficult. China, do not hurt the demonstrators. China, you made a deal with Great Britain in 1997. China, your history is 150 years of British rule there, and your commitment is to let people, two systems, one country. We all know that these demonstrators are exercising freedoms built up in a culture over 150 years. And if Steph Curry doesn't know that, and Greg Popovich doesn't know that, and Adam Silver doesn't know that, read a book. It's not even a hard book. Go read Kissinger's China. It's a great audio book. I'm not asking you to read Graham Allison's Destined for War. I'm not asking you to do anything. Read a book. Read Wikipedia, for goodness sake. Look up Hong Kong in Wikipedia. Read a great novel. Some of these guys like novels. They don't want to read real books. They want to read novels. And look, novels are real books, but they you can't use them for history. But go read the James Clavell Asia series. His wonderful book on Hong Kong. Not the second one, the first one. I can't remember the name of it right now. Generalissimo, you remember? James Clavell book. Guy Benson stole it from me because he was born in Hong Kong. I'm looking it up right now. James Clavell's, what is it? It's about the Strawn family when it gets started in Asia. Jerry Hendricks, send me a note real quickly. Not Noble House. That's the second one. Noble House is set in 1963. The first one is set, not King Rat, not Gai Jin, not Whirlwind. How can I get them all except Dirk Strawn's book? The Heroic Archetype. Dirk. He started Taipan. Go read Taipan. Get a book on tape. Read just one little bit before you go out there. Popovich especially, the most annoying man in sports. Really, the biggest bag of hot air in sports is Greg Popovich. He's got more opinions than the Christian McCaffrey has yards gained. Christian McCaffrey has more yards gained than the Jets total this year. Greg Popovich talks endlessly and means nothing. All is wind and a chasing after wind. I mean, he is the example of someone spouting off who has never, ever gone in harm's way of a tough question. Just spout off. He hates Trump. I get it. But really, he's never challenged because the NBA writers need him to talk to them because they need to make a living. And they get it. They treat him like he's some kind of deity. He's not. He's just simply not equipped. I was going to say something stronger than that. He's just not very well learned. He's not informed. He's not a student. He pretends to be one, but he's not. He's welcome on this show anytime. I'll treat him with courtesy. But the NBA, all the players, all the coaches, all the executives, shame on you. Stand with the people of Hong Kong. I'll be back tomorrow, America, on the next Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show brought to you by Sierra Pacific Mortgage. For more info, call 888-888-1172.